Hello, everyone. My name is Shellen McCoy. I'm the Executive Director for the Foundation for Conservation of Atlantic Salmon. I'd like to say welcome to the webinar here today. We always love doing them. Today's webinar is going to be in English, but if you look in the chat, we do have the option of the AI translation, so please follow those instructions and you'll be able to hear it in French. For today's webinar, we're really pleased to be hosting Michael Fabiano. Michael's currently the Conservation Coordinator at the Marguerite Salmon Association. Michael completed his undergraduate degree in biology with a focus in freshwater fisheries at Queen's University. Following his undergrad, Michael worked on the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources as a fisheries technician and as a biologist collecting and reporting on data from Lake Erie and its surrounding tributaries and connecting channels. He then pursued his master's in Marine Affairs program at Dalhousie University under the Master of Marine Management degree. In this degree, he studied the social outcomes produced by Maritime Atlantic Salmon Hatchery and stocking programs under Dr. Hannah Harrison in the Fish People Place Lab. Following completion of this degree, Michael worked briefly as a researcher at the lab before coming to the Marguerite Salmon Association. Michael hopes that his research will aid in creating more comprehensive management strategies for Atlantic salmon hatchery and stocking work in the Maritimes. Today is going to be speaking on human dimensions of hatcheries study. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael. As you know, for those that have attended these webinars before, at the end of the session, we'll allow some time for some questions and answers. So I'll let you know what that's going to look like when we get to that point. So Michael, thank you. I will. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Charlene. That was a really nice introduction. I don't have to introduce myself for once, which is nice. So I'm sure this is no news to anyone here, but Atlantic salmon are in trouble. It's an unfortunate reality. Stocks have been declining in the Maritimes for several decades now, and many populations have been or are at risk of extirpation. This is of concern as salmon are an important species. They carry immense significance for indigenous communities, ecosystem function, the economies of many locations, and the culture of our region. There are many reasons for their decline, which include the damming of spawning rivers, overharvesting, the destruction of habitat, and invasive species and climate change, to name a few. Ever since Canada became a country, more or less, the federal government has been intervening to conserve or enhance Atlantic salmon populations. Some of these protections include fisheries closures, gear restrictions, and the artificial propagation of salmon using hatcheries to boost populations. Being one of the more contentious conservation tools for Atlantic salmon, this talk will focus primarily on hatcheries and stocking. So before I get too far into this presentation, I wanted to define some of the terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation. These may seem intuitive to some, but I also had a bunch of family and friends tell me they were coming to this who have absolutely no background in fisheries. So this is just to get us all on the same page. So one term you may see on my slides or may hear me say is the term SES. This stands for Social Ecological Systems, which I will talk more about and define later. Another one is DFO, which stands for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They are a federal regulatory body over much of the fish and fisheries within Canada. And more importantly for this presentation, they regulate and manage the Maritime Atlantic Salmon Hatchery Network and all stocking activities. So getting back on track here, stocking. Fisheries managers may choose to stock for a variety of reasons, including to increase recreational catch or to mitigate for habitat destruction. From an Indigenous point of view, stocking may provide opportunities to access or re-access salmon for food, social, or ceremonial purposes. Additionally, in the current biodiversity declines we are seeing, hatcheries may be a way to conserve Atlantic salmon into the future. Due to the early life stages of salmon having an incredibly high mortality rate in the wild, some estimates putting as high as 99%, hatcheries were developed with the idea of decreasing this mortality rate at these critical life stages through human intervention. This in theory should give us more fish. While the logic may seem sound, scientific studies surrounding the impacts of hatcheries have brought their benefits of their use into question. This is known as the hatchery debate. So on one side of the hatchery debate, you have the natural science literature. Virtually all the natural science literature on stocking and hatcheries points to them being detrimental to wild salmon populations. Reasons for this include the negative behavioral, physiological, epigenetic, and genetic impacts of the hatchery rearing environment, generally known as the hatchery effect. When these, what some would call inferior hatchery-raised fish, are released, they interact with wild individuals, diluting local genetic adaptation and increasing competition for wild fish. Conversely, while the genetic and physiological literature has highlighted the harms that hatcheries can cause, other disciplines have contextualized these concerns within the broader landscape of salmon declines. Some have argued that hatcheries may be a beneficial way to maintain salmon populations until more robust conservation measures can be deployed, or that in small populations, the risk of extinction outweighs the risk of fitness loss through stocking. Additionally, a growing field of study grounded in the social sciences has begun to explore the social, cultural, and economic contexts, outcomes, and dynamics of hatcheries and stocking programs, discovering that these facilities often have more to them than just the release of fish. So as can be seen, the hatchery debate is highly contested. And it is of note that not all hatchery and stocking practices are the same. There are many scientific advancements and practices that can mitigate many of these concerns raised on the natural science side of this debate. One example that comes to mind is the Fundy Salmon Recovery Project, where they're using really groundbreaking technology to help bring back salmon to the inner bay of Fundy. However, these types of programs remain costly and thus are not utilized in many cases. Turning our attention to the Maritimes, there are currently 9 hatchery facilities engaged in anadromous Atlantic salmon stocking, as seen in this map here. Notably, only 2 of these facilities are federally owned. This is because from the 1970s through to the 1990s, DFO divested from many of its hatchery facilities, deeming them no longer central to their mandate due to the perceived genetic and ecological risks they pose to wild salmon populations. Many feel this perspective has remained in DFO to this day. Despite hatcheries and stocking being utilized as a conservation tool in the Maritimes since the 1870s and DFO themselves running many of these facilities in the past, there remains no comprehensive guideline outlining their best use for the rearing of Atlantic salmon. As a result, fisheries management must rely on the relevant documents such as the Fisheries Act and the National Code on the Introductions and Transfers of Aquatic Organisms. The primary aim of these documents is to manage the potential biological, ecological, and genetic risks associated with the movement, captive rearing, or introduction of fish to protect biodiversity, as well as the ecological and genetic integrity while maintaining human benefits provided by the resources. Many feel that these guiding documents don't do enough to consider all the perspectives that need to be considered in hatchery management, resulting in calls from academics and members of the public alike to better incorporate social, economic, and indigenous perspectives into this decision making. Further, this lack of standardized guidelines to manage hatcheries has resulted in the present maritime hatchery network, where hatcheries are run by a variety of different organizations, utilizing different techniques and trying to achieve different goals. A concept that may help shed some light on all of this confusion is social ecological systems thinking. Social ecological systems thinking teaches us that systems involve complex interactions between social and biophysical components. And just to kind of explain that a little bit better, think of systems as like general areas with interacting pieces. Social elements are human-defined elements, such as relationships between like 2 humans or between humans and salmon. And the biophysical aspects are natural ecosystem functions such as the nutrient cycle or predation or genetics. A common issue in many conservation efforts is an overemphasis on the biophysical aspects of this socio-ecological systems while neglecting the social dimensions. Socio-ecological systems thinking emphasizes that effective conservation must consider both of these factors. So the maritime hatchery debate can be seen as a socio-ecological system. Historically, DFO's management of this issue has focused on the biophysical components, such as genetic integrity and the ecological impacts of hatcheries, while neglecting the interconnected social dimensions. This imbalance has resulted in its current state, where scientific evidence continues to highlight the ecological and genetic harms of hatcheries, yet hatcheries continue to persist. Something is not working here. As per the social ecological systems literature, in order to achieve effective conservation, considerations of both the biophysical and social sides need to be made. This brings me to my research. My research explores the range of implicit yet desirable conservation, social, and psychological outcomes. I will be referring to all these just generally as social outcomes that Atlantic salmon hatcheries in the Maritimes produce. Through better understanding the social side of this debate, we may be able to gain a more comprehensive understanding of this social ecological system, which can inform management. So in my research, I've aimed to describe and characterize the social outcomes that are facilitated by these hatchery facilities. 4 hatcheries are included in my paper as case studies. These are the Fraser's Mills and Margaree Hatchery, owned by the province of Nova Scotia, the Coldbrook Biodiversity Facility, owned by the Government of Canada, and the Miramichi Salmon Conservation Center, owned by the Miramichi Salmon Association. Data collection occurred during the summers of 2023 and 2024. My primary research method for this data collection was interviews. Interview participants were identified using the key informants approach, which aims to identify key knowledge holders surrounding certain topics. From there, snowball sampling was used, which means asking previous interview participants to identify other people we should talk to, and so on and so forth, until we start to hear repetition of names, which means saturation was achieved. 34 people were interviewed for the study. The perspectives include those of employees from the case study hatcheries, individuals closely connected to these hatcheries, and members of the broader Atlantic salmon conservation community. A semi-structured interview guide was used in these interviews to ensure consistency across the interviews, while allowing for individual knowledges and experiences to be explored in more depth. To complement interview data, another way I further immersed myself in this research was through interacting with salmon and the people who raised these salmon in the areas that they were trying to protect. As you have seen and will see throughout the rest of this presentation, I have a lot of photos of salmon and salmon rivers. These are from moments when I've been fortunate enough to interact with these salmon through hatcheries at their various life stages. This photo here is from a high point in my research when I was able to release an adult salmon into the Petitcodiac watershed as part of the Fundy Salmon Recovery Project. These experiences are also were also part of my methods, as they allowed me to engage with and understand this topic on a deeper level. My theoretical approach for doing this work was grounded theory. Grounded approaches are used to generate theory regarding the reality of the subject or phenomenon that is grounded in the data itself. So basically, I was using the data I collected to inform the theory I ended up using. An important component of grounded approaches is the iterative process of data analysis, which basically means getting to know the data extremely well by spending lots of time reviewing and working with it. This was achieved by me conducting the interviews, reviewing the transcripts, and finally analyzing the interviews. When it was all said and done, I probably went over each of these 34 interviews about 3 or 4 times, maybe more. An open coding approach was used to analyze the data, as is consistent with grounded approaches. Coding is the process of attaching sentiments or sentences or ideas to a code to summarize or categorize it. From there, codes are then grouped into code families and then into larger themes, which form the basis of my results section. And on the right on this slide here, you can see an example of a theme from my code book. So you have at the top there the future of salmon being the overarching theme, and all the smaller codes below are what fed into this theme. As these different code families and themes arose, I discussed them with my supervisor to situate them in the bigger picture and as part of the iterative process of data analysis. So some of the social outcomes produced by these hatchery facilities resulting from my analysis are shown here. These outcomes include hatcheries facilitating grassroots science and conservation movements, hatcheries as a way to pass down Atlantic salmon rearing knowledge, hatcheries as ways to cope with ecological anxiety, and as a form of connection to salmon. Several sub-themes also emerged, including perspectives on current governance structures and the concept of wildness. I am going to dive into them all a little bit more now. So hatchery facilities were seen to act as hubs for all sorts of science and conservation work to take place. As seen in this quote here, groups from local river organizations to NGOs to universities to provincial and federal governments all had ties to these hatcheries. Because all of these groups coalesced around these hatcheries, all types of salmon work from research to monitoring would be thus facilitated by these hatcheries. One example that I saw was the Dungarvan project on the Miramichi River, which was a collaboration between the University of New Brunswick and the Miramichi Salmon Association, where smolt to adult supplemented smolts were being compared to traditional hatchery raised fish to test for differences in fitness. This outcome of the networks formed around hatcheries is not novel to my results, as it was shown in some of these same case study hatcheries by Dalby and Harrison 2025, but my results extended it to additional maritime hatcheries. In addition to facilitating research, many of these hatchery groups undertook some of this work themselves, participating in conservation efforts such as salmon monitoring, habitat improvement, and removing blockages from rivers to aid in salmon movement. As seen in this quote here, some participants even went as far to say that these groups are doing more for salmon than DFO themselves. This is a really important outcome because these hatcheries and the groups that form around them provide a place for concerned salmon advocates and the general public more broadly to get involved with salmon conservation issues. Another outcome produced by these hatchery facilities was them being repositories of local knowledge. In the four case study hatcheries I focused on here, no two hatcheries were built the same. They all had different construction, relied on different water sources, and dealt with different issues. Because of this, knowledge on how to effectively rear Atlantic salmon using the specific hatchery was built up over many years and was passed down from generation to generation through the hatchery managers, as conveyed in this quote here. These two quotes here, sorry. This is significant because as salmon stocks continue to decline in the Maritimes, these hatcheries and thus this knowledge contained within them may become increasingly important. A sub-theme that frequently came up when talking to participants was the concept of wildness. Wildness is a very contested topic in the hatchery debate, with questions surrounding what constitutes a true wild fish and whether wildness really matters remaining up for debate. When talking to participants, we received a range of perspectives, from wildness mattering very little to wildness being strictly defined and hatchery fish or any other type of fish were inferior. However, between these two extremes, many participants appeared to take a more agnostic view on the issue of wildness, believing that genetics and overall fitness were of a lower priority than the actual presence of fish. This can be seen in this quote here. This participant is talking about taking their grandkids, if their grandkids are able to fish 100 years from now, do they really care if the adipose fin is there or not? The adipose fin in this case represents wildness, as many hatchery-reared fish have their adipose fin clipped off prior to release for monitoring purposes. This is an interesting finding because it shows a discrepancy between the views of many participants and DFO's legislation and mandates. DFO's definition of wild indicates that in order for a fish to be considered wild and thus afforded certain protections, the fish needs to be born and have lived its entire life cycle in the wild and have come from parents who did the same. This is a very strict definition that puts very rigorous metrics of what it means to be wild on these fish. However, as seen in my results, participants didn't hold wild fish to the same regard in many cases, explaining that the wildness of the fish being less important than the actual presence of fish themselves, highlighting a disconnect between the priorities of DFO and those of the public. Hatcheries were also seen as a way for people to connect to salmon, fostering what we call the human-salmon relationship. The connection formed by these hatcheries was valued as many participants expressed a belief that conservation action requires a connection between humans and the resource. As this quote here puts, it is the connection to these fish that many participants have that drives conservation movements. This sentiment is frequently seen in the flagship species literature, where large or charismatic species such as like pandas or whales are used to elicit a feeling of care for the species and thus pressure for conservation action. The same is occurring here for salmon. People have to care for the salmon in order for them to be conserved, and hatcheries are seen as a mechanism for getting people to care. Hatcheries were seen to support these connections to salmon and get people caring about salmon in two primary ways. So many participants identified hatcheries as keys to supporting angling. Fishing or angling is the original way people connected to these fish, from indigenous communities to early settlers to like anglers and fishermen today. Participants viewed these hatchery facilities to boost fish population, which in turn increases angling opportunities, participation, and success rate, which results in a stronger connection between these fish and people. In addition to supporting angling, these hatcheries also fostered non-extractive forms of connections to fish through education programs. One example is the Fish Friends program, where school students get fish tanks in their class and get to watch salmon from the egg to the fry stage while learning a curriculum about salmon. This promotes education, which also leads to a connection to and care for the fish. Hatcheries are vital to these programs in that they provide the eggs for the salmon, or the salmon eggs for the classroom, and also provide the expertise on how to effectively rear the salmon. Another similar example of education programs would be like hatchery visits. Many of these case study hatcheries were open for the public to come visit and tour the hatchery, allowing for members of the public to interact with salmon at all these various life stages that would otherwise be invisible to them in the wild. This education was seen as really important, as this quote here, the more you know about them, the more you respect them. This theme of hatcheries offering a form of connection to salmon was one of the more interesting, and was actually what my supervisor and I decided to focus most of our efforts on when developing my master's thesis into a publishable manuscript. In the social ecological systems literature, there is a commonly discussed topic of resilience, which describes a system's ability to absorb and withstand perturbations and maintain its structure and function. In this case here, people are losing their connections and relationships with salmon due to climate change and overfishing and all of the other reasons I mentioned before that are causing salmon populations to decline. This is disrupting the system. However, hatcheries in this case are acting as vehicles for connections between people and salmon to persist, as they offer a way for people to continually learn about, interact with, and care for salmon, even as salmon populations decline. Hatcheries are thus providing social resilience to these social ecological systems. Shifting the focus to the future of salmon and how hatcheries are seen as a way to cope with ecological anxiety, many participants expressed fears and concerns about the future of Atlantic salmon, often drawing examples of their grandchildren and the fear that future generations might never be able to see or benefit from salmon as they themselves have, as seen in this quote here. This aligns with the concept of ecological anxiety, which is a feeling of distress about environmental degradation and loss. And this photo here really showcases the basis of that worry. This is a photo of the fish return board at the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility, a federally owned hatchery that intercepts fish as they travel up the St. John River. While this is not a hatchery facility discussed in this study, this photo showcases the drastic declines being seen in the Maritimes, as this location went from having 702 fish in 2019 at the bottom there to just 83 fish in 2023 at the top there. And reports from 2024 indicate that this number is still dropping. This highlights the losses being seen even in the past 5 or 6 years. For many, hatchery facilities offered a glimmer of hope, as shown in this quote here, that through human intervention, Atlantic salmon populations may continue in the Maritimes. Hatcheries were seen as a way to help salmon along, as participants felt that they owed that to the fish. This relates to the resilience of the system that I touched on earlier. This is significant because hope can be a very powerful tool. While some literature may argue against using hope to justify the use of hatcheries in stocking, arguing that this is an expression of blind faith or arrogance, these criticisms have often been raised in the context of humans over nature or Hail Mary attempts when all else has failed, rather than, as seen in these case studies, as an exercise of hope against ecological grief as seen in these cases. The hope that these facilities provide may just be enough to keep salmon conservation efforts going a little while longer. So, as can be seen, this research highlights the numerous social outcomes associated with hatcheries that occur outside of the fish they produce. While this is important to document and understand, it is crucial that I emphasize that these outcomes should not be misconstrued as justification for stocking solely for social reasons. Remembering the social ecological system, conservation only works when both social and biophysical aspects are considered together. This work aims to highlight the social outcomes of this system so that they may be adequately considered alongside the ecological and genetic arguments when management decisions are made. The intent of this research is to complement and not replace the current hatchery management practices. Coming back to DFO's management of this issue, many participants expressed concern about how DFO manage Atlantic salmon and hatcheries in the Maritimes. DFO's management of Atlantic salmon and hatcheries largely followed the prevailing literature on the topic. For a long time, the literature was focused on the ecological and genetic impacts of hatcheries, and thus management followed suit. However, people who engage with these hatchery facilities also experience social outcomes from these hatcheries, many of which are starting to have peer-reviewed backing themselves in studies like mine and others like it. This resulted in a misalignment with the views of management and those of the people working in these hatchery facilities or those of the general public, resulting in conflict. In interviews, this manifested through a perceived lack of care, as displayed in this quote here, their slow pace, or their overly precautious approaches. So how can these social outcomes be used to improve management practices and get DFO and the public back on the same page. As many of you likely know, DFO has recently released their Atlantic salmon strategy. This was great to see after it being talked about for so many years. That's definitely a huge win. However, notably, this is more of a high-level document and does not have any specific management guidelines in regards to stocking specifically. It does, however, identify stocking as a major issue and indicates that a stocking policy is to come. In 2023, a What We Heard report was put out by DFO regarding this recently released strategy. This report outlined what many of the perspectives concerned salmon advocates held in regards to DFO's Atlantic salmon management plans and where attention should be paid. In regard to stocking specifically, it outlined a desire to take a more balanced approach to stocking activities, using stocking as a management tool when appropriate, improving in the management of stocking by providing more guidance, opportunities for collaboration, and improving stocking practices, while also recognizing the utility of hatcheries and stocking in maintaining social, cultural, and ecological connections to salmon. The social outcomes explored in my research align with many of these sentiments expressed by the public and offer an actionable opportunity to address these concerns. DFO could increase opportunities for collaboration by engaging and working alongside with these community-based conservation movements that have been established around these hatcheries. DFO could work to improve stocking practices by engaging with and considering the local knowledge stored within these hatchery communities and incorporating it into scientific advancements. DFO could improve management approaches by considering many of the discussion criticisms of their perceived lack of care, slow speed, and misalignment with the views of the public. And finally, DFO could better recognize the utility of stocking and maintaining social, cultural, and ecological connections to salmon by considering the hatcheries' role in acting as coping mechanisms for ecological anxiety and in their facilitation of the human-salmon relationship. Again, while these social outcomes should not act as a license to stock in themselves, considering both the social and biophysical components of this system will be the key to ensuring a smoother transition and less opposition to whatever future Atlantic salmon management measures DFO chooses to pursue. This research will hopefully bring us closer to what truly matters, ensuring current and future generations get to see and benefit from this incredible species of fish. I first and foremost want to thank all the participants of my study, as this work would not have been possible without them. I would also like to thank the funders of this project, namely the Shirk Insight Development Grant, the Nova Scotia Freshwater Fisheries Research Cooperative, and the Fish People Place Lab. I'd like to extend my deepest thanks to Dr. Hannah Harrison for her guidance and support throughout this project, from fieldwork to methodologies to analysis and writing. She basically taught me how to do social science from the ground up, so a big thanks to her. I'd like to thank my friends and family for their support throughout this whole master's project. And finally, I'd like to thank the kind people at FCAS for giving me the opportunity to share my work today. Thank you all for listening, and I will now turn it over back to Charlene, who's going to open it up for some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. I really enjoyed your presentation. Really great summary on what you heard and the data that was collected to look at the connection between the human and social perspective when looking at the hatcheries and how it can play a role in the future of Atlantic salmon in the maritime. So thank you for that. Like Michael said, we are going to open up to questions and answers. For those that have not attended our webinars before, I encourage you to raise the little hand that's on your screen, and I will unmute you so you can ask your own question and Michael can answer. If you have any issues to do that, you can also type it in and I will be happy to read it out loud for you. So now we're ready. I'll look at the screen here. So feel free to ask any questions. Okay, we got a hand. So Greg Lovely, go ahead.
Good job, Michael. Glad to have you on as our new conservation coordinator at Marguerite Salmon Association. You did a great job.
Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
All right, We have Paul McNeil. Please, you can unmute. Paul?
How about that? Do you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Michael. My question is about the fact that I think 7 different groups were involved with rearing Atlantic salmon. Did anything? I guess my question is, was there any noticeable difference between the hatcheries in terms of the whole aspect of how Atlantic salmon were reared and the rationale and the processes in each place? I noticed one was a DFO and 2 were Nova Scotia and 1 was the Miramichi. So any obvious variations and you didn't make any comment or one was better or worse than the other. What's your opinion of that? Is there a way to improve hatcheries?
Thanks for the question, Paul. I just want to, like, first and foremost, I'm not an expert on hatchery practices myself, so I can't say whether like definitively whether like one practice is better than another. There was a lot of variance in the types of hatcheries in the Maritimes. One like striking example I guess I saw was the Abiguit hatchery in PEI. So this is an indigenous run hatchery. They have like it's a small hatchery, but it's also a very modern and high tech hatchery. And they I believe they release like egg sac stage fry into their watershed, which is a technique that in the literature has been spoken of like more highly than like keeping fish later, because you have less imprinting on the hatchery rearing environment. Other hatcheries such as the ones here in Nova Scotia release a mix of fry and older fish species. You have the 2 DFO hatcheries, which are not really concerned with releasing fish for abundance. They're more concerned with ensuring that all the genetic families of these in this population remain like well represented and they remain around. You have the Fundy Salmon Recovery Project, and they're using like top of the line like new techniques to try and reintroduce salmon into the Inner Bay of Fundy rivers. So there is such a large variety of types of hatcheries in the Maritimes, all utilizing different I guess procedures or methods of raising salmon, and in many cases trying to achieve different goals. So example, like as I mentioned, the DFO gene bank hatcheries are not concerned with putting fish out for people to catch or for there to be more fish. They just want to ensure that the genetic families remain intact, whereas other hatcheries like the Marguerite or the Fraser's Mills are more concerned with conservation and like mitigating angling mortality, versus say the Abiguit hatchery, which is more concerned with the actual like conservation of salmon themselves.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have another hand raised. Bill Halley, you're free to unmute. Bill? Try again. Bill Halley. You might be having a hard time unmuting.
Yeah.
Okay, we do have a question that came in that I'll read for you, Michael, from David Roth. Is the complete thesis already available?
Yes, it is. It is available on the DALSpace, just the Dalhousie thesis database. I'm not sure how user friendly or easy it would be to find, but I believe if you just search up like the title of my talk, it is in there. I've also recently submitted a publishable manuscript into fisheries research, I believe. So hopefully that'll be coming out relatively soon. Hopefully it gets accepted, I guess, first and foremost. But short answer, yes, it is available online.
Thank you. I see Bill was trying again a different way to come in. I don't know if you can ask your question, Bill. If not, if anybody's having any difficulties, please feel free to email your question. I'll make sure Michael gets it and we'll get an answer back to you. We do have another hand raised right now before we head out. So Jamie Vallis, I'm hoping I say your name correctly. Go ahead.
Yeah, you got it. Hey, Michael. Just wanted to clarify. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So for the Marguerite hatchery and Fraser's Mills, we don't release fry. We release par and smolt. Usually the par go out in the fall and then smolt the following spring. That was just a clarifying note. I did have a quick question. Somewhere back between, I think it was slide 14 or 15, you were talking about like wild, how a wild fish can be measured, or I'm kind of curious of how you can measure a wild fish when you need multiple generations of said fish in a river that has hatchery influence. How's that a measurable thing? Like you're only like we fin clip, obviously, adipose fins. So you have, if that generation goes out and comes back, you have that generation laying eggs on the ground. But that's where the measurable variance ends right there. Like you can't, or you can't physically measure anyway. I'm just kind of curious to how you can kind of include that or say that in.
I just want to clarify, that's not my personal perspective. That's the definition put out by like DFO. That is their like mandated definition of what a wild fish is. I really don't know how one would be able to like know if like not only like I agree with your point, like you'd be able to know if the individual fish you're handling is wild or not, because if in case it was like adipose clipped or something like that, but maybe there are genetic techniques to I guess understand how far back like the wildness or like whether like ancestors or previous generations of this fish were in hatchery environments. But yeah, I really don't know how that would be measured.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably a better question for DFO. I was just kind of curious on how that's measured. Understandable in a river that has, I guess, no hatchery influence, but in a river that does, I mean, I don't know how you'd go about that.
It'd be very difficult. I don't see a way.
Yeah. All right, appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for the question, and thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. Stephen Thibodeau, please feel free to ask your question.
It's a different platform. Can you folks hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Michael, is a very interesting presentation. Great job. And it's kind of in the same focus as Jamie. So I was just wondering, in your literature review, were you able to find ways where hatchery input or imprint was quantifiable? You know, maybe a hatchery with a brood stock they'd keep on hand for multiple years versus a hatchery that would bring in wild brood stock annually. Was there a way of quantifying the hatchery imprints?
It's a good question. I'm not sure exactly. I think there are like certain techniques that are known to be less like cause less of an imprinting on the hatchery environment.
For sure,
But
like
I'm not sure.
less time in the facility for sure. I'm just wondering if
Yeah,
there's a way of actually quantifying this.
yeah.
Where our provincial hatcheries collect wild brood stock every year. I'm curious how much of
Yeah.
a hatchery imprint or how much genetics are impacted through wild collection, limited time at the facilities, and then
Mhm.
of course stocking, right?
Yeah, like I'm sure like those are all like very like well spoken of techniques in the literature. Um, they're seen as like definitely better than like keeping like brood stock just in house and consistently like reusing them. But I really don't know how one would go about like quantifying the impact of one um, like technique over another. I can, if you want to get in contact with me, I believe I read a couple papers that like attempted to do that. I can definitely send them your way, but it's not really my area of expertise, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just was curious, like I said, as you were going over literature, if maybe you come across something like that. So, and I'm
Yeah,
sure we'll cross paths eventually. Yeah,
yeah.
looking
No,
forward to
I'll
meeting you
try
then.
and
Yep.
yeah, no, likewise. I'll try and I'll try and get those papers for you.
Okay.
Hopefully they can answer you better than I can.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Bill, do you want to try again? He had his hands raised again, so.
I can give Bill a call after if he still has a question. I have his number.
Okay, sounds good. I think he's having a hard time, so. All right, well, if there's no more questions right now, and you, of course, like I said a while ago, if you think of one after the fact, just get a hold of us. I'll make sure Michael, gets be able to answer any questions, or if you have any comments that you would like to share with him, please feel free to reach out. So I just want to finish by saying this a special thanks for Michael. This is actually the last webinar of the series for 2024 and 2025. We usually try to do 10. So this is the 10th one. Right now, we're already working towards building a list for September. So if anyone online has any topics or speakers they think would be very valuable and then you want us to reach out and add to the next series, please let us know and we'll do that. But apart from that, I just appreciate everyone for joining us. Appreciate Michael and wish you all well. Thank you. Oh, and it's going to be recorded. So if you know someone that hasn't had a chance, you want to look at the presentation again, it will be on our YouTube page. Okay.
Thanks, Charlene, and thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you. Hope to see you soon.